Imagine a foreign power arriving at your shores, demanding trade. When you refuse, they flood your country with addictive drugs, hook millions of your people, and then go to war to protect that trade. That's exactly what Britain did to China in the 1800s. The British Empire, desperate for profit, forced opium into Chinese society, leaving devastation in its wake. And when the Chinese tried to resist, Britain unleashed gunboats and firepower, waging wars not for freedom or civilization, but for the right to sell narcotics. This is the story of the Opium Wars, one of the most shameless examples of colonial exploitation in history. It's a story of greed, humiliation, and the human cost of empire. By the late 1700s, Britain was hooked, not on opium, but on tea. The British obsession with Chinese tea was so great that it became a staple of everyday life, from aristocrats sipping fine porcelain cups to industrial workers drinking it with sugar before heading to the factory floor. Along with silk and porcelain, Chinese goods were in massive demand in Europe, but there was a problem. China didn't want much from Britain. The Qing dynasty was largely self-sufficient, and they only accepted payment in silver. That meant silver was pouring out of Britain and into China, creating a massive trade imbalance that threatened the empire's finances. The solution Britain found was ruthless. From its colony in India, the East India Company began cultivating opium poppies on a massive scale. That opium was then smuggled into China, where a growing market of addiction was carefully nurtured. By the early 1800s, millions of Chinese people were hooked. Opium dens spread across the empire. Soldiers, laborers, even government officials fell into addiction. What had once been a proud empire was being hollowed out from the inside, all so that Britain could balance its books. The profits were staggering. Silver, which had once drained out of Britain to pay for tea, now flowed back as Chinese addicts paid for their fix. The East India Company, with the backing of the crown, grew rich. Britain's economy stabilized. But for China, the cost was catastrophic. Families destroyed, productivity collapsed, and social stability shaken. The Qing government saw the crisis clearly and tried to stop it.
The First Opium War began in 1839. British gunboats, armed with modern cannons, clashed with Qing forces still relying on outdated weapons. The result was a slaughter. Britain's navy easily dominated Chinese defenses, shelling ports, destroying fleets, and marching inland. By 1842, China was defeated and forced to sign the Treaty of Nanjing, the first of what came to be known as the Unequal Treaties. China was made to open 5 treaty ports to foreign trade. Britain took control of Hong Kong, beginning 155 years of colonial rule. The Qing had to pay a massive indemnity in silver, further draining their treasury. Worse still, Britain had secured the right to continue trading opium, ensuring that addiction would continue to devastate Chinese society. But Britain wasn't done. In 1856, Britain launched the Second Opium War, this time joined by France. The excuses were thin. A minor incident involving a Chinese vessel gave Britain the pretext it needed. Once again, Western forces unleashed destruction. This war culminated in the infamous burning of the Old Summer Palace in Beijing, a cultural treasure of the Chinese Empire. Palaces, gardens, priceless works of art, all looted or set ablaze in a calculated act of humiliation. The Treaty of Tientsin that followed expanded foreign control even further. More ports were opened, missionaries were granted free movement, and opium imports were legalized. China, once the wealthiest civilization on earth, was being carved open by colonial powers. The hypocrisy was staggering. In Britain itself, opium use was tightly controlled. Nobody wanted British streets filled with addicts. Yet abroad, in China, opium was pushed at gunpoint. This was not free trade. It was not civilization. It was addiction weaponized for profit. The consequences for China were devastating. Historians call the period that followed the century of humiliation. The Qing dynasty, weakened by addiction, corruption, and foreign aggression, could not control its vast territory. Rebellions erupted, foreign powers seized concessions, and Chinese sovereignty was eroded piece by piece. The memory of those wars, of being forced to kneel before Western gunboats, still runs deep in China's political consciousness today. When modern Chinese leaders speak of never again being humiliated by foreign powers, they are thinking of the Opium Wars. When they speak of sovereignty and independence, they are recalling how Britain once waged war to flood their nation with drugs. The story of Britain's opium empire is not just history, it's a reminder of what colonialism truly meant. Not spreading civilization, but exploiting weakness. Not free trade, but forced addiction. It shows us how the wealth of empires was built on the suffering of others, and how those wounds can last centuries. Britain's addiction to tea created an addiction in China far more destructive, and the wars fought to preserve that trade remain one of the clearest examples of empire at its ugliest. The day Britain became the world's largest drug cartel. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more deep dives into the world's incredible histories.